Well, hello everyone. This is Jim Ransom with another Morning Jim poetry reading. We recently featured Emily Dickinson. If you were here last week, and you remember her poetry was rescued by her sister Lavinia after she died. Today we are turning our attention to a much different woman, Edna St Vincent Millay. Isn't that a beautiful name? I always thought so. She was born in 1892, but of course did most of her work in the 20th century, where she was widely recognized as probably the leading woman poet. Her mother was a strong and intelligent woman who, after having 3 daughters by her husband, Millay, decided he was not the one. And he is described in the brief biography I read as a frivolous person. Well, we can't have that for a great New England poet, can we? So her mother became a nurse and devoted herself to raising her daughters. And she was enough of a scholar herself to demand that they read good books, and a lot of them. And of these 3 children, Edna was the most anxious to learn, seemed to be anyway, and eventually graduated from Radcliffe. Even during her early years, she wanted to be a poet, and her first poems were published in a magazine for children called St. Nicholas, with her first publication at age 14. After being advised sometime later by a publisher friend that she could make more money writing short stories for magazines, she took that up with a vengeance. And she had the pen name for that of Nancy Boyd. And she wrote a lot of them and was well paid for them. She had affairs with some writers of her time. After all, this was the 1920s. Women were beginning to come out of jail, if you want to call it that, and do whatever they pleased. Edna rejected most proposals of marriage, however, but finally she accepted the proposal from a wealthy Dutch businessman, Eugen Jan Boissevain. He sold out his business and had a lot of money in the bank to boot, and devoted himself to Edna's success. And she was 31 years old and already a successful writer by the time they married. They had no children. She continued to write both poetry and operatic lyrics. She died in 1950. She was best known for her sonnets. And as a sonnet writer, these are some of her most famous ones. I'm going to start out with one called Pity Me Not Because the Light of Day. Pity me not because the light of day at close of day no longer walks the sky. Pity me not for beauties passed away from field and thicket as the years goes by. Pity me not the waning of the moon, nor that the ebbing tide goes out to sea, nor that a man's desire is hushed too soon, and you no longer look with love on me. This have I known always, love is no more than the wide blossom which the wind assails, than the great tide that treads the shifting shore, strewing fresh wreckage gathered in the gales. Pity me that the heart is slow to learn what the swift mind beholds at every turn. And finally, this poem is one of those that you probably have learned and read or saw in school. And it's one of those that I remember from my early student days. It's titled, "What Lips My Lips Have Kissed, and Where, and Why. I have forgotten, and what arms have lain under my head till morning, but the rain is full of ghosts tonight that tap and sigh upon the glass and listen for reply. And in my heart there stirs a quiet pain for unremembered lads that not again will turn to me at midnight with a cry. Thus in the winter stands the lonely tree, nor knows what birds have vanished one by one, yet knows its boughs more silent than before. I cannot say what loves have come and gone. I only know that summer sang in me a little while, that in me sings no more." That poem was first published in Vanity Fair in the fall of 1920. And in some ways that represented the end of the sonnet as a poetic mode in America and in American poetry, or at least of the, let's say, the lyric sonnet, the sonnet typical of the 19th century and even of the poets before that. We'll end with another poem called Ashes of Life. Love has gone and left me, and the days are all alike. Eat I must, and sleep I will, and would that night were here, but to lie awake and hear the slow hours strike. Would that it were day again, with twilight near. Love has gone and left me, and I don't know what to do. This or that, or what you will is all the same to me. But all the things that I began, I leave before I'm through. There's little use in anything as far as I can see. Love has gone and left me. And the neighbors knock and borrow. And life goes on forever like the gnawing of a mouse. And tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, there's this little street and this little house. Well, that's kind of a sad poem. And in some ways, Edna St Vincent Millay led a sad life. She, by the time she got through with the men of her early life, she was a little neurotic. And she was prone to periods of depression. But being married to Busavane seemed to be a tonic for her for quite a while. And that marriage seemed to produce happiness for a long time in Edna, even though her poems cried out otherwise in some cases. But notice that most of the sonnets here that I've read, I read 2 out of the 3 were sonnets, and the last one was not a sonnet. But 2 out of the 3 sonnets were titled with the first line of the sonnet, which is kind of a tradition in English poetry, so that pity me not because the light of day, at close of day no longer walks the sky. The title of that is Pity Me Not Because the Light of Day. And I think of all the poets in English since Shakespeare, Edna St Vincent Millay probably wrote the most sonnets and the highest rated sonnets. Millay's work was widely anthologized. She wrote some librettos for modern operas, and at least one of these librettos, not librettos, but librettos, at least one of these sold 60,000 copies at its first printing. Her reputation as a poet seemed to go downhill in the 1930s. She was still living and writing. And during World War II, there wasn't much of a market for romantic sonnets, let's face it. But her reputation recovered and has remained quite strong to this day. Edna St Vincent Millay, a much different poet in almost every way from Emily Dickinson, whose work we covered last time. And I would suggest that if you're interested at all in her work, and you probably should be if you're interested in poetry at all, I would recommend getting a book of her poetry or looking up an anthology that has quite a few of her poems and read them, because they're really well done and worth it in every way. Okay, I'm going to let you go. It's evening, not morning, when I'm finally getting around to this. And I'm looking forward to a very nice supper prepared by my daughter. And I'm not looking forward to going out in the weather, which is rather damp, misty, and I would have to say British style tonight. That's it for today, and I wish you all a great week. Bye now.